Hi everyone, as Stephanie said, I'm Elizabeth. I am a for Arlington County Government. So we got emails about this event. It was from me. So welcome to our third technical assistance training session for the Race to Rebuilding Trust and Community NOFA. This technical assistance session will focus on the evaluation process for the NOFA. This NOFA process is a partnership between Arlington County Government and the United Way of the National Capital Area. And we have been working together. This is the team that has been working together to develop this process and write the NOFA. We have, on the county side, we have Amina, myself, Samia, Amber, who is back there. And then with the and Sarah, and then with the United Way, we have Scott, who's over here, Stephanie, and Aja, who is contracting with United Way. And so a little bit of overview and background. If you've been to other sessions, you've probably heard this, but in collaboration with United Way, the county is committed to establishing a transparent and accountable process as with those foundational values to rebuild trust between the county government and the community members. To move the process forward, the county board adopted a resolution supporting a transition to a racial equity-based competitive process for funding nonprofits who are working in the human services realm to address any inequities for Black, Indigenous, people of color, communities, and to address any system impacts for all. So looking at our timeline and selection process for this NOFA. The NOFA was announced in early October, and then on October 25th, we had our first session, technical assistance session, which provided an overview for the entire NOFA. And if you missed any of these technical assistance sessions, you can always go back to the website. They're all recorded online. And then the second technical assistance session was on how to develop a logic model. That was on November 15th. You are at the third technical assistance session on evaluation. And then we're having a fourth technical assistance session, which will be entirely virtual. And that will, it's fine. Yeah. And then the fourth session will be all online on December 18th in a week. And that will just be wrapping up any loose ends or questions that you all still have. The NOFA is due on December 21st. And then January through March, we will be training the review panel members and giving them a chance to review the applications and form their recommendations. It will go before the county board. The recommendations will go before the county board in April of 2024. And the board will approve the recommendations at that point. In May, all applicants will have an opportunity to get feedback on their submissions. And then funding will be dispersed in July, August of 2024. So here's what you can expect through the process of evaluation. So once you submit the application by December 21st, your application will be screened for completeness. And so that will be done by the Race to Rebuilding Trust team that you saw earlier. And we'll contact you if there's any issue with some required document that's not there. We will contact you 24 hours to fix it. And that's like if your 501c3 letter is incompleteness will be screened at that point. And then an independent panel of reviewers will review the scores, review and score the applications. Like I said, January to March timeframe. So at the end of that time frame, they'll convene for a consensus session to establish their final scores, where they'll discuss the application and come up with final scores and recommendations. The county board will receive those scores and the funding recommendations. And then the award will be approved again at that April meeting at the county board. All the applicants can review their scores and see the feedback from the review panels. And county staff will also be available to all applicants to give any more in-person feedback for the proposals. So how we are getting these review panels formed. We are working to establish a review panel that consists of both staff who are subject matter experts in human services and grants and program evaluation, and also community members, people who are really in touch with the community and with experience. We want a good mix of both. So for staff reviewers, we are recruiting in county departments based on staff interest and expertise. We have been connecting with employee resource groups to try to get the word out and to try to get people connected to this opportunity. We've been reaching out to department heads, trying to get on staff meeting agendas, and trying to meet people at in-person events, whether trainings or coffee chat, to answer any questions that may be interested in this opportunity. For community reviewers, we have been recruiting during planned community events taking place around the county at various gathering places, at food distribution sites, vaccine clinics, PTA events. We've shared about PTA, we've shared this opportunity with the schools so that they could try to get it out in ways that they have. This morning, Amber, we're talking to people there about it. And then, so tabling at community events, sharing flyers at the county buildings. And we've been developing a contact list to follow up with those interested. As far as criteria for reviewers, what we are expecting of them, they will only score what is written, recorded, and provided, and they'll have that Likert scale that's on the rubric that you in the packet. Reviewers are going to complete a conflict of interest non-disclosure form. So if they have close ties to a nonprofit, they will let us know and then not be reviewing that nonprofit. Reviewers will receive training on how to use the scoring rubric. So that training will happen in January. And we'll be going over how to use the rubric and also scoring objectively, removing bias from the review process. And they're also going to receive our Arlington County's racial equity training that county staff also. And then when reviewers will independently review a set of applications, and they'll come together at consensus building sessions. So the applications are going to be distributed among reviewers. They'll individually score their proposals, and they will meet to discuss their proposals, to provide comments, and to reach a final cumulative score. A moderator will facilitate those discussions and will take notes on the final scores, and so that those notes can then be used for feedback for all applicants. Reviewers are going to provide their score on each application with a narrative on how to reach their cumulative score. And then those final scores will be used to make the recommendation to the county board. The county board, like I said, will approve them in their April meeting. And once awards have been approved, applicants have the opportunity to see all of the feedback that reviewers provided at these sessions.
All right, I'll tag team in with Elizabeth. So as we mentioned, we're going to be working with the reviewers. Oh, by the way, I'm Stephanie Crane. I'm Director of Community Impact at United Way. I've been working with the Arlington County team. It's really nice to be here tonight. So thank you all for braving the Monday night. So we'll be talking about objective versus subjective scoring. And the idea here is, as Elizabeth already sort of shared, that we're requesting that all the thoughts must be written or recorded. So reviewers cannot score something not there. They cannot make a question. So ideally, you are answering the question in a complete manner, such that the reviewers are not trying to infer anything because they can't score on inferences or assumptions. We're encouraging the reviewers to resist comparisons, scoring each application in complete isolation, not comparing it to another application they scored, but simply just scoring what's written, what's recorded for that application. We'll be training reviewers on recognizing their biases. So really noting if you love arts programs and you're going to automatically give a dance program full score because you love it, recognizing those biases, completing your conflict of interest form so that we can reassign and make sure that you are able to do this objectively. We're asking the reviewers to concentrate on content rather than grammar. And that's true for both the recorded and the written. So this is not, did you put your semicolon in the right place, but more of what's the idea conveyed? Did you answer the question? Are we able to understand what you're proposing to do? And the reviewers will read, listen, score, and comment one section at a time. So as the rubric is broken out, and we'll go through that, they're going to go section by section and score in that order. So it behooves you to write in that order. So it also behooves you to not go overboard, right? You put in a whole lot of extra extraneous information, like a lot of detail, or you try to include hyperlinks, you could get lost in your narrative. So really just answer the question. Did give guidance on 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margin, single spaced. You're not required to restate the questions. Just be clear about what question you're answering in the order it's. Avoid providing additional details outside the question. Be concise and clear, and do not provide extraneous information. It's possible you would lose points in doing. So also, we want you to have the best possible comments to work with. So we are going to be training the reviewers on providing helpful, strong comments, including going over detailed comments that are very clear and telling you what you did well or where you could improve. So weak comments like this section is horrible, or please give more detail, or I really like this, will not be allowed or permitted. The reviewers will be encouraged to talk about what was clear in the delivery, how the applicant provided specific examples that impact the youth, etc. Does that make sense? So in your PowerPoint and your NOFA, starting on page 21, we're going to look at section 3, kind of go through so you understand how to use the rubric to your advantage as you're creating your application. So ideally, what you want to do is pull the rubric up as you're writing or recording, look to that excellent 3 points, and make sure you are covering each one of those checkboxes. Notice that the ones highlighted in green are really that distinction between a 2 and a 3. Distinction between what's good versus what's excellent. And if you don't have a response, you would be in the 0 points. If you have a little bit of a response, it's not quite something you do, write to the acceptable, write to the good, but ideally, always try to be writing to the excellent. And we go question by question, so as you can see, the questions are listed, and then the exact checkboxes that the reviewers will be using to score you. There's a score section as well as the comment section. You can see your scores for each question, as well as your comments for each section. So again, this is going, those were questions 5 and 6. This is question 7. So again, really pull up that 3, look at all the things in there. Try to give yourself a checkbox to score yourself as you're writing your proposal or recording your proposal. And again, question by question. So this is how it works. We're going to do a sample and score together. Just a moment, so get ready to flex your reviewer hats. So in front of you, you will see a section 3 sample, like this, or document. We're going to go.
Just mention that it's also online.
Oh, it's also online for folks on Zoom.
Online.
Okay, sure.
I have a couple.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. One is asking whether the reviewers were compensated for submitting our time and at the beginning.
Yes, the community reviewers who are doing this as community members with lived experience will be compensated for their time for each section of the review process that they complete.
And the second question is, would you repeat the instruction about submissions needing to be 12-point times New England thought? It's not listed in the NOFA.
It's in that frequently asked questions, but that's a great question. So in the frequently asked questions, we were asked to give guidance on that. So it is 12-point font, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins, single spaced.
That's it.
Okay, great. So if you all who are online don't mind pulling up the section 3 program project description sample response, and those in the room, it's in your packet. If you take a little bit of time, read each question, and you can go to page 21 of your NOFA, so you have a bigger version of the rubric in front of you. And you'll go and score each question. We'll just take a little time. We'll start with question 5. When everyone is done with question 5, you can raise your hand, and then we'll go together and see how we score. And also, if you have some comments for that section after you score it. Online, you can definitely drop your score in the chat for question 5. I'm gonna go ahead and move to the rubric so you can also see it on the screen. I didn't bring any Jeopardy music, but roughly that long, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I was gonna put the
asking
link
for-
up,
You got it?
yeah.
I'm pulling it up.
And for those who are on Zoom, you're welcome to drop your score, any comments you may have in your chat. Folks in the room, you're welcome to raise your hand when you're ready to share your score and leave your comments. Okay, one more minute, and we'll share some scores. Okay, who wants to be brave? There's no wrong answer. Just tell us what you think. You would have maybe given question number 5 based on the rubric in front of you. Sample response. Yes.
I would probably say 2.
Great.
I was thinking of 3, but it wasn't hitting. Like all the points it needed for 3, so I'll probably say 2.
That's what I scored. Yeah, cool. And I said the same thing, the green section was kind of missing that logistical connection. Didn't really tie all the points back together. Did anybody feel differently or strongly differently? And that's okay. That's part of what the consensus sessions are for.
On mine, we got a 1.5.
Okay, so ideally it's gotta be whole numbers. So we would have rounded that to a 2, but I appreciate the 1.5. And I'd love to hear the reason behind the 1.5.
Cool.
Sure. Anyone else want to share?
I'm trying to unmute. Do you want to hear the reason for the 1.5?
Thank you.
I felt like there was a lot more in there than really focused on the need. So it was a little muddy in terms of getting to really answering the questions that the rubric is looking for. I had to go back and read a couple of times, which I kind of feel like I shouldn't have had to do. There wasn't, there was data about the population, but that doesn't necessarily imply a need. And the, let me see, what was some of the other stuff about defining the need. Yes, it's urgent, but it's an ongoing problem. So I just kind of felt like it didn't quite meet that. It didn't really push what the urgency was. So I don't know. But if you can only do round numbers, obviously it would have gotten a 2.
Thank you, and that's really helpful. And that speaks to that whole concept of really just answering the question and not providing a lot of extraneous detail because you had to go back and read it several times.
Yeah, which meant I didn't have time to leave comments.
Fair, completely fair. Thank you. And we had someone else in the room wanting to share.
So maybe I'm too generous, but I gave it a 3 because I felt like there was enormous pressure to get this into a short and succinct. Like that's my big struggle now, so I'm looking at it from that lens. We have 17 questions from 5 to 22 to get into 10 pages in 12 font with 1-inch margins. So you have almost a half a page for each question. So they, in this paragraph, address the population. I felt the need was connected, and just to me, it laid out the points in a succinct way. Maybe it could have been written clearer, but if we're not looking at grammar and looking more at the content, I felt like it checked the box for 3. So
No, that's great. And that's sort of what we would do in a consensus session, right? So you'd have a couple of people in the room that were 2s, you had a 3, we'd all share, we decide where we land as a group, right? So if somebody was convincing you and saying, well, I agree, they didn't actually make the connection to all the pieces, they did hit those other 3 points really well, and 2, how do you feel about that? And then you guys can kind of go back and forth and take a moment to really decide together what's your final score for that question. So it's a really great thing.
And just so the rubric was designed to have that third piece, which is the green box. That was meant to be a distinguishing factor between the 2s and the 3s, so that we weren't, it would be an idea of sort of exchanging with the other reviewers, but also being able to revert back to, hey, where are you going to draw the line? So the writing towards the green box is one of the things that would make the distinction between a 2 and a 3 for each of the questions, because we also saw that, hey, maybe it's great, maybe it's pretty good, and someone's good might be great, and someone else's great might not be not so good. So we really did want to kind of come up with a criteria that would help guide that kind of conversation, especially in the consensus narratives.
Great points. Thank you. And yes, it is very concise, which is why we're really trying to tell folks to utilize those boxes and just.
is it reasonable, the page limit? Can I challenge that? With when you then add on 12 font, 1-inch margins.
11 font.
It's just, there's a lot of, to hit a green box and hit all the points that you want to hit for 17 questions in a 10, right?
And some of the questions, just to pull out, like your budget and narrative don't count towards your 10 pages. Your logic model is a separate pull out. So just note a couple of those things are not going to be included in your 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually, for flow purposes, looks better when the
Oh, it
budget
can be
is
included, but it
in
won't
it.
be counted as part
Oh,
of your
okay, because I was artificially pulling it out just to keep it down to the 10. Because I was afraid they wouldn't read it past 10 and say, oh, I'm instructed not to look at anything after the 10th
So
page.
we'll clarify that with the reviewers, but ideally what we did is we actually pulled out and created templates for you for all of those.
Yep.
So that they are created there in there separately, so that again, they can get we'll print it out as one cohesive section, but remind them that the logic model, the budget and narrative do not count. And your staffing chart, I think also is.
So the order that you kept it in is fine, and the way that you would want to submit or present the proposal is fine. There's gonna be people who are gonna be presenting it not written, but verbal, so it's fine however you want to organize it.
So you
But
can include the sections in the narrative.
that's correct,
Those
but
templates.
just beware that when you're on the portal, they'll have the narrative section, the proposal is submitted as one, and then you'll have a separate link for the logic model and for the budget narrative. So they'll be submitted as separate items and elements, so that way your 10 pages won't be counted, it won't be miscounted.
Because that lets us know you didn't miss any of the requirements.
So you still have to pull it out anyway.
So we will pull it out for the.
If you
reviewers
wanna
and for
refer
them.
to it, yeah, exactly, if you wanna refer to it and say, here's where I want you to consider my logic model, then by all means, right? But don't include the logic model in your proposal because you're gonna need to submit it somewhere else on the portal.
Great question. And we can certainly bring the 11 point font back.
For discussion, yeah, that's fine.
I don't mean to sound whingy, but I'm
No.
really, that's where I am struggling how to hit the green boxes, but get it in.
I've just
I think you
discovered
feel
I'm
my
4
pain.
pages too
Me
long.
too, that's where I am.
And I'm like, I'm the one in charge. On a different question, like since the the budget layout, logic model, et cetera, won't be, do we need to include like number 18 budget C attachment, or do we like take that out and that just saves 3 lines?
Yeah, we can, because we can print them for the reviewers and just let them know that they are inserted in those places where they're supposed to be, so that will automatically be in order as part of your.
Yeah, and there's a couple ways that you could present it. I understand that being detailed and thorough is important, but if it's just sort of C logic model, I mean, the whole application is taken holistically. And for the folks who are checking for completeness, they all write grant proposals, so they'll know what they're looking at.
Okay, are you guys ready to practice another one? Okay, how about question 6? Pretty long. Take your time to read it. And let me know if you would have landed the scoring and any comments you may have. One more minute. Got enough time? Are we ready to share? Again, there's no wrong answers. Anybody feel they want to give a score to this one? Okay.
I went down to
Actually, I gave them a 1 because I couldn't find where they talked about the description of the gap in the community if the program didn't exist. So that would not allow them to proceed to 2 because there wasn't a description of the gap. Even though it's a very verbose and detailed answer, it was missing that one critical piece. That's okay. No, we landed in the same place. Anybody online want to share?
We got one that says it's definitely gets a 3. Lots of detail about the activities of the program, the engagement of the teams, and where they go after the program is complete.
Yes, that was a little tricky because it's true. It did give all those details, but you're looking as you go checkbox by checkbox, they have to hit everything in the checkbox to move to the next one. So because you got to 2, they didn't describe the gap. They couldn't move beyond. That makes sense. So again, really looking at those checkboxes, making sure you're hitting everything in the check.
So if in the first question, it talks about the need and they talk about what happens if these kids don't have these opportunities. That doesn't, can't reflect back on a previous question.
No, it creates
So you
so
have-
much confusion for the reviewer. So really just. It's a great question. Yeah, because some folks will say the previous section. You don't want to do that because then the reviewers have to try to go.
Oh, you
back.
guys are killing me. Okay.
But it's a good question. It's a great question.
So for this part, we're going forward that the reviewer remembers.
No, because they're going for what's in these actual check boxes, right? So they're looking at, did you describe the proposed services? Did you include 1 or more details?
So essentially, that's like requirement.
If it asks you to do it, but and ideally, we're gonna try not to too often so that you're, again, saving pages. Okay, how about question 7? Flip to the next page.
Seems that the calendar is not needed, takes lots of space.
Yeah. So again, that extra detail that you may not need that create confusion for the reviewer, but don't actually cover anything.
So they're referring to page 2 and 3 here of the example. Everything that comes that outlines the calendar. That's a very good point, Wendy. Thanks for bringing it up. That if it doesn't fulfill what's being asked in the question, then it's taking up valuable real estate. Just as a last point is that the green box, as I mentioned, oh, sorry. Yeah. Yep. Examples show logical relationship of services fulfilling the state of need. So they're in itself tying back to the previous question, right? Because in proposing how the services are addressing the need, you don't need to restate the need because you're doing it in your answer. One word.
One more minute. Okay, are we ready to share the response or do we need a little more time? Again, there's not a wrong answer because again, in the consensus session, we would all talk through this. See where we each. I'll go. So I probably would have given this a 3. I thought they had a detailed explanation of how the organization is set up to deliver the proposed services, and they also detailed their staff. And they gave more than one example of how they're able to provide services, especially with staff. But does anybody disagree or feel differently? That's okay, yeah.
Just got a question, what level of detail should we include in the budget? Cause I know there's like a template. Is it fine if that's more extensive than what's in the narrative, or we can put that into?
So I think the way it's set up is that it's built into your budget in the narrative, so ideally. But you would be answering for the narrative questions. You would be answering any of those questions in the actual proposal. So if we're going to funding requests, there's some distinct questions there that are outside of the narrative.
Sorry, I meant for like the billable staff. Is that not one of the?
Oh, yeah, that's to just sort of talk through your staffing model, but it is a little bit of a separate document. So here you'd want to just talk about the staff who are directly delivering the programming and give just and again, as you can see, there wasn't a lot of detail about what they did, just how many years experience they have, or they were a graduate. So it can be like a sentence or two, it doesn't, but you might, and to your point, in your table, which will be scored in another section, you could include it. Yeah, it's a great question.
Online we have a different score.
Okay.
All right, I'm thinking there are no examples of how they are set up, no past performance, so this gets them a 0. Describes good experience levels for staff, but not any success stories. But were there examples? It seems they are describing how the kids are involved in the program, but that doesn't strike me as
So that would be a good point of context for the consensus session, where we would talk through with the moderator and see how the group felt. Because I would say they talk about their positive youth development model. They talk about how the youth contribute to the workshops, how they lead portions of the work. So I would have counted that as examples, but it sounds like this reviewer may not have. So I think we would talk through this in the consensus session and arrive at a score or arrive at an agreement of that. Because it didn't specifically ask for
past performance.
Right.
It's an interpretive, it's the art and science part.
Right, but it is again, if we're just going by the checklist, because it doesn't ask for past performance. That's where we could talk through that a little bit, because it wasn't one of the pieces, it was just are relevant to the proposed services and contribute towards access and effectiveness. But again, it's a great point, and it's a great point that would be discussed in the consensus session, and folks would have to agree to arrive at a final score together.
Just so I'm clear, there are 3 questions that ask about the staff and organization in 3 different ways. So question 7, question 14, question 22. And we have to lay out staff and the board, their numbers of experience, their expertise, their education, their ethnicity or background, diversity. Just again, struggling with my space issues.
So one is the table that That's the distinction there. And again, that table is just talking about, that's your section 7 table, so that's not gonna be part of your narrative, that's really just a table. I mean, there's a sample of that table online to sort of show you the level of detail.
So we need to assume that they're only looking at that one question, that one answer, and they won't be looking at the other 3 areas where staff has discussed.
So they're actually different questions a little bit, so like, I think here is discussed about the delivery of this particular program and how it's impacting, is making the organization set up to deliver this program. The board might be a little bit more about what's the composition of your organization, how does that impact your, because it's in the racial equity section, so it's kind of looking a little bit at a different sort of concept here. So while it is asking about staffing, it's asking about it from a different.
Same people, but then showing it in the
And they
different
may be the
information
same
that
people,
you're
but there may
asking.
not be. So that's a, for some folks, they may have a very small program staff, just like 3 or 4 people that are doing the actual this part, section 3. Then your board, some of your other makeup of your board might include additional folks that were not included in this. Ready for 2 more? All right, how about question 8?
That's a question.
That's a question. Are we ready? Anybody want to share their score?
I'm gonna say it's 3.
Why would you give them a 3?
It is. Question. Well, partners, and the partner to do it, and reason why they have the partnerships. So I was gonna put
get a counter. And I would actually give them a 1 because they never talked about the length of their partnerships. They just said they've been partnering with them. So I don't know if it's 2 years or 6 months. So it stalled me there. But yeah, it was a very complete answer otherwise. So again, just really going through those check boxes. And again, sorry, these are very tricky for that purpose to just kind of highlight that the simplest detail could sort of stop you at an earlier box. But I think it's a good point, right? Because otherwise it's very well covered. They did talk a lot about the partnerships, how they would use those partnerships, they're new or existing. Yeah, it's a great point. Any other questions or comments? Okay, last one, and I'll open it up to more questions. Remember that. Or are we ready now?
We do have a answer online.
Okay, sure.
The rubric guidance is not asked in the question. Questions are based on new or existing partnerships. What relation does that have to delivering on proposed programming? They do discuss in detail how they will come to do the things that they're asking the question.
So the idea there is that if you're talking about the partnerships, you want to detail how these partnerships are helping you deliver the programming and whether they are new or existing. So it actually is still part of that work. So you could still talk about the delivery through the lens of the partnerships. I hope that helps.
Still formulating this.
That's okay. No, it's a great question. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, that can do actually. I feel like that acceptable 1 point should start with describe how the partnerships help deliver the proposed programming.
Okay.
Because that question seems to refer back to the project description on how the organization is gonna deliver the project, the proposed programming, not the partnership. So I was just confused how we're evaluating the partnership piece, if that question sounds like it's about the programming.
Got it. So we need to change the word organization to partnerships. That would make it more clear.
In my opinion, but
Excuse me, there was a question that was asked, I think, there was a man who asked a question and I didn't quite hear what it was and the response, and I'm sorry, could you repeat what the question and the response was?
Sure, the question was that it felt like the first couple of boxes in all three, 1, 2, and 3, did not clearly ask the question of the actual question. So it said about how does the organization deliver the proposed programming, which we've already asked. So the idea here and the response was that the idea was within the realm of the partnership. So the idea was really describe how the partnerships the organization has will help deliver the proposed programming. So it sounds like we need to make an adjustment here. So it's a little more clearly spelled out because it seemed like it was confusing folks. It was sort of going back to the first question and not its particular set of questions. We need to adjust the rubric so that it reads partnerships of the organization versus just the organization. Does that make sense?
So the rubrics question doesn't reflect the proposals question in this particular situation very well.
It does, but I think there's a word missing, and the word is partnership, because it sounds like we're just asking about the organization delivering the program and not how the partnerships with the organization will help deliver the program.
Okay, thank you.
There's a word missing. This is a good question. Yes, thank you.
I feel like they went into a lot of detail in this question, so I think if I were to look at that, I would then get hired, but otherwise I think it's not specific.
I had a 2, but I could very easily have been adjusted to a 1 because I felt like they did not they needed to strengthen the clearly defined goals and indicators for their partnerships, and I felt like that was from 3 for sure, but I could see based on the way it's written now, for folks would go all the way down to a 1. So again, that would be something we would discuss in a consensus session and talk through that to arrive at a final score. Okay, so questions? Lots of them. No. So this was particularly a challenging sample because we're going to work with our reviewers to really make sure that they understand how to score. So they will also get a sample, basically this one, and we will walk them through it. It's a mock proposal. Make sure they understand the scoring just as you are. The concerned faces in the room. I don't see them online, but any questions? Anything?
If you have formal MOUs, you will need to describe them, so it can meet the rubric and attach them.
No, you don't have to do that. You can talk about, because what it's asking for is describes in detail if they're new or existing, the importance of the collaboration, and then how it will live beyond the actual proposal, but you don't have to show or attach the actual MOUs. You can just state that you have MOUs. You know, I think it creates confusion for the reviewers, so I would not recommend it because it would be another document they have to search through and they're not necessarily going to be scoring it. It would be scoring.
I've had partners provide statement of intent, which is just a sentence or two for each partner that they are on board if it would advance, but again, my page.
Yeah. No, and it's not really necessarily asking for that. It's asking for how this will impact the delivery of the proposed programming. So is it that they're providing internships? Is it that they're providing workshops? So it can be very simple and straightforward versus like a whole scope of work or a whole scope of work statement.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that was an important element when I looked at the bigger picture of these evaluators. Like they only know that there is a need in the community if we have clearly demonstrated that there's, right? So I thought by bringing in the voices of the partners to say, yes, we do need this, and having the state in there would be important. But what I'm understanding now is that they're not necessarily ascertaining need evaluators, they're actually really literally just looking at.
They're ascertaining need in your first, right, the first part of this section, so when we started,
Yeah.
there was a question around framing the need
Yeah.
and sharing whether relevant data points or anecdotal stories, so that is the place where you would be establishing the need.
But here in the partners, just by saying they're willing to partner is sufficient.
But there, you know, that you have an existing partnership or that you're working to get this partnership, why you're working to get this partnership, what will it bring to you delivering your program? But it doesn't have to be a formal statement of work. But they will bring internships to the young people to get them additional.
I have a general question about partnerships and which partnerships to include. My question is, if I'm describing a project that has, let's say, many different activities, and it has a lot of different partnerships, do you have a general guidance on how to narrow down like which partners to highlight?
Yeah, I would utilize the green box as that distinguisher, and in these cases,
Okay.
again, it's really asking you for more than one example of how the organization will deliver the proposed programming with the partners. So really highlighting what's essential to you delivering this program, what partnerships are essential to you, and highlighting those partnerships. Understand there may be multiple, but you're really looking to describe more than one example. So having at least two of those partners.
The purpose, exactly, the purpose of the partnerships is to show that together there's going to be a greater impact, or you know, that you'll be able to achieve the goal in a more efficient way or a more effective way, and that you're just trying to tie the two together. Why do you need to collaborate, and how is that collaboration going to achieve the goal? That's what we would love to hear.
So we are over recruiting. And the idea is, I believe we said we'd have 6 per panel, 3 of each.
I thought it was 4.
Oh, 2 of each, sorry. Sorry, 4 per panel. So 2
Two
subject
and
matter
alternates.
and 2 community members. And then we'll have alternates because we do know folks have real life and things happen. And so if someone asks us about, we'll make sure everyone is trained to go.
Very good.
So the community members may not have any experience in, say, yoga or education programs for teens.
It's possible, but that doesn't, again, the way we've set up the rubric and the way that we're utilizing the scores, you don't have to necessarily have subject matter expertise to be able to really review and see if those components are particular and clearly described.
And how is recruitment going?
The subject matter experts is going well.
I think we have, Amber, correct me if I'm wrong, have we met like our minimum threshold of applicants
Yes, for both.
for both?
Yes.
And we want, but life happens, so we're obviously trying to get more.
We also started early, so if you get into time that we're recruiting, we also they're the ones that we get to.
And one of the questions says, basically, you ask, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing here, like, you ask for X amount, we may not give it to you, so like how, you would give less, basically, who will be making the decision on whether or not you receive your full ask, or
The review panel will be doing that, so they'll be trying to stretch the dollars as far as they can, looking at the asks, looking at the strength of the proposal, what was submitted. There's also a description that we ask of, if you were not given your full funding, how would you address that? So that will also be a part of it.
Question online. would you provide an example of a strong response for questions 13? Should it be addressed in this response or threaded throughout the submission?
So it should be answered in 13. You would go to section 5 of the rubric. Really look at the responses there, and again, write to question 3. So really making sure that you are going to section 5. Sorry, I'm trying to find it.
It's 24.
Page 21.
24.
24, thank you. Okay. So how does your proposal advance racial and other forms of social equity? Consider Arlington County's racial equity lens on page 24 of the NOFA. So again, really look to excellent, right? So you want to describe in detail how the proposal advances racial equity, include more than one specific strategy, detail, or tactic to advance racial equity. You can use Arlington County's racial equity lens in your response, so really referring to that wheel. And then the alignment between the specific strategies and Arlington County's racial equity lens is that green box. That's the thing that differentiates it from a 2. And then describe the demographics of the organization and board there. So really talking through how your board, your organization reflects that racial equity lens, social equity lens of your proposal. So again, just utilizing the rubric, it wouldn't be peppered throughout, it would be addressed in question 13. Yes.
Just want to make sure I got some things right. You guys are not looking at a grammar content, right?
Content, yep.
That's good. And if we follow the rubric without questions, it's a good chance that we can do mathematics, right?
Ideally, yes. That's the plan. We're trying to keep it as simple as we can to give you exactly how the reviewers are trained to score you, so you're seeing exactly the same score sheet. I hope that helps. And I know it's not always possible to write to everything in the 3, so just getting as close as you can. Maybe you're like, this one is not going to be a 3, this one might have to be a 2, just writing to everything in the 2, right? But ideally, you start with the 3.
And on budget, I know in a past technical assistance session, you stated we could put in our own template or own format of the budget, it doesn't have to follow specifically. So how are they going to be coached to evaluate that? And if it's not following, the exact format. So for example, my organization is a pre-approved vendor for Arlington County for racial equity services. So we have pre-approved rates for how we do our program. So I am reflecting those pre-approved rates in our budget. It doesn't break it out part-time, full-time staff, like all those other, it's pre-approved rates. So I can.
So distinguishing that in the narrative, the budget template you're submitting, to just define that those are pre-approved rates.
And that's acceptable.
That would help us to explain to the reviewers why it doesn't have the FTEs, but that's the approved rate, and that's why they're.
Budget narrative isn't restricted in terms of length, right? Like, I mean, we're not suggesting you write an opus, but
Yeah.
the idea is
Yeah.
feel free to take as much time, as much space as you need in order to provide the appropriate context to your budget, especially if you don't use the budget template, then it would be reasonable and even encouraged to use the appropriate narrative to help explain the context.
But it does say in section 6, just to be clear, on page 26, complete the budget template, use definitions below to inform. So if you're not going to use the definitions, make sure you're completing your template, including both cost and narratives for the line items. So make sure that if it's not an exact formula, that you're explaining why, and that all that it's fully detailed and easy to understand. So if a reviewer is picking this up, they need to understand these are pre-approved rates that you've already been approved for because of X, Y, and Z. Make sure that line is included so that it is distinguishable and that you're hitting those boxes in that first question.
don't actually name the things, so I get the point that I put the words in proposal. But then explain that.
in the
they're not
narrative,
relevant
in the
to me.
template, in your template. So it says complete the budget template appendix, but if you're gonna submit a separate template, just make sure you're completing your template so that it's clearly hits that it's complete. That includes both costs and the narratives for those line items, so you don't just have a floating cost out there, but there's an explanation for what that cost is. And then that it's detailed and easy to understand. So again, if it's that we have a pre-approved rate, because we're an Arlington County vendor, we have a pre-approved rate because we are Arlington County vendor and it is $250.
I might ask you after, that's okay, just to clarify.
Okay.
I think I got you.
Other question?
If you're applying for GS and have a large organization, what advice do you have about presenting budgets? General
Support.
support.
General support, yeah.
Thank you, Shani.
So again, just really making sure that you're hitting those points on page 26. Look at 3, make sure it's complete. Make sure that you are showing the costs and the narrative. There's a description for each of those, and the description is clear to understand. It doesn't have to necessarily be a formula, right? It doesn't have to be a mathematical formula. It could just be, you know, as we just stated, our organization is pre-approved for a rate. The rate is $250 per client, per community. So just as you're looking at your overall budget, making sure that you're doing that, you know, and if there's other sources of revenue or anything else as you're going down, really just making your budget clear, even with general support, utilizing section 6, the funding requests.
I have another question about that general support budget. This question is, if your organization serves Arlington, but also outside of Arlington, like the organization that I work for serves Montgomery County and in Alexandria, I just want to make sure, can you still apply for general support?
I'm going to lean on my Arlington colleagues here because I think you would want to distinguish the Arlington work for this, our Arlington dollars. So ideally, if your budgets are this one giant budget, how are you distinguishing the Arlington work in that budget, or is it all one budget? But I don't, Amber and Elizabeth, please.
Yeah, I was previous we had organizations that serve maybe Arlington and DC residents, and they've highlighted in their proposal their work in Arlington's petition. So
Right. For example, the last NOFA that I was a part of was open to organizations outside of Arlington. But they highlighted, they either used like client counts or they talked about programs that were specifically run in Arlington locations. And just to highlight the amount of work they're doing that benefits Arlington directly.
Oh,
and in terms of, I'm thinking about staffing too, we heard from others. Think some folks be that clear in their budgets in places like the staff are working 10% of their salary and fringe benefits toward the community in Arlington project. So being clear about that.
you're able to hear that. So distinguishing the percentage of staff times that focus on Arlington County work. Any other questions? Well, we will be recording this one again as well. So this will be available to you. The frequently asked questions are still up. We will be having another session on the 18th, which is virtual, which is for any final questions that may be coming up as you're finalizing your narrative. So please don't hesitate to join us and let us know. But the Equity NOFA email is here, equitynofa@arlingtonpa.us. You can send any questions you have there. Up until the 2nd. Dated very regularly, especially post these. So. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all for those who are online. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate. Again, I can stay for a little while longer and